Hi, I'm Megan Brown, teacher and EdTech enthusiast. Thanks for joining me on this journey to learn and share meaningful ways to integrate technology into everyday lessons. So, you want to teach with technology? Let's get started. Hello, everyone. I am so excited to start this podcast with you all. I hope you learn a little something from me, and I can't wait to learn from all of you and your experiences. Today's episode is So You Have to Teach Online. I thought this would be a good topic to start our podcast with because right now it is August in 2020, and parents and districts are making decisions about if students will attend class in person or online. And I don't know about you, but where I am, a lot of schools have decided to start online. There are going to be so many students this year participating in an online education. Some students may have autoimmune diseases where it's going to be dangerous for them to be around so many people and potentially deadly if they were to get sick. Some parents might just be worried about sending their student back into the classroom in case they were to get sick or bring it to another member of their family. Finally, because last year ended online, many students may have realized that they learn better in an online environment than they do in person. So parents might select that because it's better for their child. These are all perfectly valid reasons for students to have an online education. Before we dive into how to create online lessons, I want to get one of my pet peeves out of the way. I don't like it when teachers, parents, or administrators say that online school does not provide the same quality education as in-person classes. This statement is completely false. Learning might look different, and there are definitely challenges that teachers might not be trained for. But in no way does that diminish the quality of education that students receive. There are so many resources available right now to allow for all types of instruction, and it will take time and effort on the part of the teacher to find and prepare these, but there's no reason why attending an online school can't have that same high-quality education that they'll receive in a school building. The last thing I want to address before we get started is my experience with online education. Just like most teachers in the United States, the last semester of the 2019-2020 school year, I had to teach from my house because of coronavirus. This was my first real experience teaching an actual class online, but my other experiences come from my education. I'm currently working on my master's degree in instructional design and technology. A lot of my coursework has focused on developing, testing, and modifying online courses and some interactive activities for students. I am relatively new at this and do not claim to be an expert, but I really enjoyed teaching online, and I saw firsthand how much students can learn and grow even if we're miles apart. So now that you know a little about me, let's go ahead and dive into So You Have to Teach Online. We are going to go through how to create a lesson for an online classroom from start to finish. You will hopefully notice that it's not much different than planning a lesson for an in-person class, but the tools we're going to use might be different, and it's even more important that students understand their expectations for learning. Just like in planning for an in-person class, we're going to use the backwards design process to plan for an online classroom. Typically, when teaching an online class, teachers plan and share lessons week by week. This gives students some flexibility in their schedule to complete activities and ample time to ask for help. So the first step in planning an online lesson is selecting the standards to be taught. This is always the first step in lesson planning so that we as teachers know exactly what students need to learn. If you're planning for 1 week, 1 to 2 standards are typically appropriate, but you'll know what's achievable for your students. After you've determined the standards, you need to write usually between 1 and 4 learning objectives for your students. Again, the actual number of learning objectives does not matter as much. What's important is that you're challenging students without overwhelming them. These objectives need to be communicated to students frequently because that's providing them a purpose for learning. You might have amazing activities that are engaging and effective at teaching the content, but students can see it simply as busy work in an online class if they don't understand the end goal for learning and how this activity helps them get to that goal. So, step one in creating a lesson for online teaching is writing learning objectives based on the content standards. After writing objectives, the second step in the backwards design process is creating assessments, both formative and summative. I'm assuming those listening are comfortable with formative and summative assessments, so I won't go into details about the difference between the two. All of the tools I'll be discussing here can be used as either formative or summative assessments. It just depends on the purpose and the placement of them throughout the lessons. The main area where assessments may differ from in-person to an online class is the resources used to create the assessments. But there are many online tools that can be used for the same purpose as paper formative assessment. I've taught math for the past 3 years, so I'm most comfortable discussing examples of formative assessments in a math classroom, but I'll try to share as many examples in other subjects as I can. The first tool I love to use for assessment is Google Forms or similar websites to create exit slips. This is my go-to assessment to give students at the end of a lesson to gauge their understanding of a new topic. I usually write 1 or 2 questions on a half sheet of paper and have students solve them without help from me or their peers. Google Forms are a great resource to use for this purpose because they offer a variety of question types. You can select multiple choice or fill in the blank questions, and the form will automatically grade each response and give you a class summary of the data. For fill in the blank questions, you can also add alternate correct answers. This is extremely useful because I know in math you can have a variety of correct answers. You could have 4, 4.0, 4 centimeters, and all of these can be accepted as correct answers. You can also add short answer or extended response questions to Google Forms and have students explain their answers. These won't automatically be graded, but I really like the variety of question options. There are many websites that can be used similarly, but they have different aesthetic features. I'm not going to list them here, but if you want to check any out, there is a list available in the notes for this episode. You can also create exit slips using the quiz feature of whatever learning management system or LMS you're using, such as Schoology or Canvas. All of these tools are a quick way to assess student understanding of a new topic while teaching online. Similar to exit slips, another way to incorporate formative assessments in an online environment is to embed assessment questions into instructional videos. Videos are a popular way to get new information across to students, and there's many websites that turn these videos into interactive activities. There's websites such as Edpuzzle, PlayPosit, or YouTube Editing all allow you to take online videos or self-created videos and embed multiple choice, open-ended questions, or have a place for comments throughout the video. This is a great way to check for student understanding throughout the video. Plus, it breaks up long videos to keep students engaged. These resources also give teachers assessment results that you can make decisions on if you need to provide more resources on a topic or if students are understanding the new information. Exit slips and embedding questions in videos all focus on students answering basic questions to gauge understanding. Assessments can also serve the purpose of seeing the process students take to answer a question or solve a problem. The ability to see students work through questions or solve higher level thinking problems is not lost in an online classroom. Online tools such as Seesaw are great for this type of assessment. Seesaw allows students to respond to prompts using video recordings, pictures, text, or audio. This is a great resource for questions that require higher level thinking because it allows students to explain their thinking and really focuses on the process rather than the product. In addition to allowing that higher level thinking, it's also a great tool for differentiation. Students choose how they want to respond to the prompt, so it's not forcing a student to write if they can explain themselves better by creating a video. I have never used Seesaw in my own classroom, but using it for formative assessments is one of my goals for this year. If you've used it in your classroom, please reach out to share your experience about how you used it and if it was beneficial for your students. One final assessment idea is to have students create original media. This can be done in many formats. Students can create YouTube videos that explain a topic, tell a story, solve a math problem. One great feature about YouTube videos is that there's an authentic audience, and that can help motivate students and give them ownership of their learning. Students will want to give their best effort on this assessment, so they create a quality product to share with the world. Another way to have students create original work is by having them create an ebook using Google Slides. This allows students to use their creativity and incorporate pictures, videos, and text. Both of these options are going to be time intensive, so students will need lots of advance notice, but they allow for high level, meaningful, and authentic assessment in an online environment. The final type of assessment that's vital to an online classroom is self-assessment. One major difference between students taking a class online and in person is students have a lot more responsibility to seek out help when it's needed if they're taking class online. In a classroom, a teacher can easily go sit next to Johnny who is struggling to complete a problem and offer help. In an online class, you can reach out to a student that you noticed didn't complete an assignment or who's struggling with the material, but you can't force them to get help. I had this struggle in my online teaching because I noticed there was a student who completed every assignment, but they were getting 50% and not retrying the assessment or coming to office hours. I sent this student countless messages on Schoology and GoGuardian offering help and saying, "Hey, come to my office hours." They said absolutely, but then never showed up. I did everything I could to make help accessible, but they never took me up on my offer to receive help. It's situations like this where it's important that students are monitoring their own learning and reflecting on their understanding about the objective. This can be achieved using any of the assessment tools that we've already discussed, but it's important that students are checking in with themselves frequently. Students need to know how to receive help if they're struggling and how their learning can be extended if they're bored. Self-assessment is important in any classroom, but it's vital online, so students are constantly reflecting on their thinking as well as the goals of the lesson. So, to plan a lesson for an online classroom, first, you write objectives. Second, you create assessments. And next, you develop instructional activities. This is where I personally get really excited in the planning process because it's an opportunity to use creativity and try new resources, even if they fall apart the first time you use them. I'm going to go through strategies and materials that you can use for direct instruction, as well as problem-based or inquiry-based learning. In this podcast, I'll talk about different tools available, but I'm not going to go into detail about the specifics on how to use them. If there's a tool you're interested in using and you want more information, I have linked resources in the episode notes. These can help you get started using the tools you think will be most effective in your classroom. I want to stress that the instructional strategy you select should come from your learning objective. So as we go through different resources, think about what objectives could benefit from each resource. I don't know about you, But I feel like I've been trained to shudder at the words direct instruction, and I rarely use direct instruction when teaching until we had to go online during quarantine. Once online, all of a sudden, we were being told to create asynchronous direct instruction videos to teach the new content. Direct instruction always has its place in learning because, let's be honest, there are some things you just cannot expect students to figure out on their own. If anyone knows a good inquiry-based lesson to teach mean absolute deviation, please let me know. I don't think that direct instruction should be the end-all be-all of online teaching, but there are a lot of amazing tools out there that make direct instruction effective and engaging. I'm going to focus here on 3: readings, screencasts, and PowerPoint presentations. I'm going to start with the strategy that I see most often in the online courses that I've taken: posting readings and having a discussion board, quiz, or other activity about the content from the readings. If there is a great article at the reading level of your students, by all means, go for it. I use this strategy in teaching about mean and median. I found an article about Michael Jordan and how his college used his salary when they advertised the mean income after graduation to misrepresent the data. My students loved learning this story, and they started to understand that content. You can also use websites such as Newsela to differentiate reading levels or offer students a choice on what they'd like to read about. I know posting readings for students seems boring and overused, but with the right articles, students will be engaged in their reading, and it's an effective strategy to teach new content, especially in higher grades. The next strategy is the one that I use most frequently because I find it fun for me and useful when teaching math: creating videos or screencasts. Videos are an effective way to teach new material and show students step by step how to answer a question or solve a problem. They are seeing what's going on, hearing me talk about it, and reading any text or closed captions on the video. This way, they're getting information in multiple ways, which will help students learn and retain new information. Next week's episode is going to go through specific tricks to make a great video or screencast for your students, so I'm not going to spend too much time going through those details today. You can also use the websites that we discussed in the assessment section to embed quiz questions into the content videos. The next direct instruction strategy you can use is a PowerPoint presentation. I know you probably think I'm kidding, but I'm serious. There are so many new features that can make PowerPoints interactive and fun for students. You can also make them look beautiful with all the backgrounds and animations that are available, but I'm going to try to stay focused on content for this podcast. You can use Microsoft PowerPoint, Google Slides, Nearpod, Prezi, Pear Deck. Not only can you include textual information, you can also embed video, audio, animations, and other multimedia to make the information accessible to all learners. Another great feature is you can embed quiz questions along the way, which is a great form of formative assessment to gauge students' understanding through their learning process. It also keeps students engaged in the content. Nearpod and Pear Deck even allow students to draw their response. This has always been my students' favorite activity when we've done these interactive slides. If students are in a synchronous environment, you can even display individuals' responses to go over examples and non-examples of the content. All of these features help students to stay engaged so you have an effective lesson and can generate higher levels of thinking using direct instruction. Not every lesson in an online classroom needs to be direct instruction. There are plenty of tools available to all subject areas that promote inquiry and critical thinking. I'm going to go through 4 of my favorite tools for inquiry-based learning in an online environment, one for each subject. There are obviously way more resources available, but I don't want this podcast to be hours long. My goal here is to show you that there are online resources available that make hands-on lessons possible, so higher levels of learning are still possible in an online classroom. I want to start with my favorite online tool, Desmos Activity Builder. This is a website typically used for math, but it can be incorporated into any subject. One of the great things about Desmos is you can create your own custom lessons, or you can go to Google and search for lessons that other teachers created. You can even modify them if there's something you want to add or change. I'm going to have an episode soon completely dedicated to the specific features of Desmos, both for math and for the general classroom. So here I'm just going to talk about how I have used Desmos in an online classroom to promote inquiry-based learning. My favorite lesson I've created on Desmos uses a feature called Marble Slide. With this activity, there are stars that students try to collect by writing equations to create lines the marbles will slide down. This is a similar idea to some apps out there where you draw lines to collect stars or fill a cup of water. The I can statement students were working towards was I can write an equation given a line on a graph. The goal was for students to see that changing the coefficient changed the steepness of the line. So y equals 4x would be steeper than y equals 1/4 x. And how having a constant made the entire graph raise or lower. On each level of this activity, students would play around with the equations to collect stars and hopefully notice a pattern along the way. It was an engaging lesson because students are essentially playing a game. After the activity, I had students complete a multiple choice Google form as an exit slip. It asked questions such as if you want to make a line on the graph steeper, what would you do? This gave me immediate feedback as to which students grasped the concept and which I needed to reach out for some direct instruction. Desmos makes these kind of inquiry-based activities possible in a math classroom, and this is really beneficial so students have ownership over their learning. Next, let's look at a science classroom. One of the best and most interesting ways to teach science is through labs. But that is a huge challenge in an online environment. Thankfully, there are a ton of great online labs that still teach students about the scientific process and have them make conclusions based on observations. An online lab will look different than completing a lab in person, but students can still learn the content as well as scientific reasoning. You can use websites such as Gizmo, PhET, or CK12. Labs can also be used in conjunction with Google Documents, Google Forms, Blogger, or Google Slides, where you can help guide students' observations. You can have them discuss their findings with other classmates, or they could even create a lab notebook. There are so many possibilities to give students real lab experiences, even if they're taking a class online. Next, let's look at social studies with Google Map Tours. Now, I've never taught social studies, but I would love to use a Google Map tour in class. There are pre-made tours, or you can create your own and include photos and videos along the way. The tours take students to different places around the globe, and you share textual information or multimedia at each stop. When students go through a Google tour, they're going on a virtual journey. This will increase their engagement as well as their retention of the material because they're being put in a story. One example that I found is a pre-made tour about the War for Independence. Instead of reading dates, places, and times, students were walked through the timeline and taken to the battlegrounds throughout the war. You can include primary sources by embedding photos and videos of firsthand accounts. If you create your own tour, you have the ability to write a story for your students to experience. I know this would have been helpful for me as a student because I had a hard time putting things into perspective from just reading words on a page. Lastly, let's look at ELA. Hyperdocs are a great way to share information in language arts classrooms and really any subject area. In a nutshell, Hyperdocs are a way to link information for students so that all of their learning is in one place. But their potential is way more than just a document with links. It's a great way to incorporate student choice. There are a lot of templates available, such as the game board, where students have to complete a certain number of activities for both learning and practice. Students can even screen capture their activities when they've completed them and add them as proof into the document. This makes grading quick and straightforward. Hyperdocs are a way to differentiate instruction for students. You can have activities leveled by ability or organized by type. Any of the tools that we've talked about in this podcast or that you use on your own can be included in Hyperdocs. You can even include design models such as the 5 E's or organize learning by increasing cognitive levels. There are plenty of pre-made templates you can individualize, or you can create your own from scratch using a Google document or Google slide. The possibilities with Hyperdocs are endless, but they're a seamless way to include lessons and practice that address differing needs of students and allow for student choice. The purpose of me discussing these tools is if there's a lesson that you love and it's hands-on or interactive, there's still a way to mirror these lessons online so your students can have that experience. It might end up looking different, but the critical thinking skills will remain. Any lesson is possible to create in an online environment. It just takes some flexibility, creativity, and time. After selecting the appropriate teaching strategies, the fourth step to plan for an online class is for students to practice the new information and teachers to provide them feedback. There are a lot of fun quiz-type games for students, such as quizzes or Gimkit, but these typically are surface-level questions, and here I want to focus on activities that promote higher-level thinking. Concept maps are a great strategy for students to practice their learning, and there are plenty of online tools that allow students to complete this activity in an online classroom. Students can use Google tools such as Docs, Drawings, or Slides to create concept maps. There are also many online resources such as Poplet that allow students to create and share their products. Poplet also allows students to include multimedia in their concept map in addition to text. I love using concept maps for student practice because it requires students to think critically about the relationship between different concepts. In addition to creating concept webs, I usually have students defend their concept web and explain how they made decisions about the relationships they created. Using online resources is also effective because you can provide feedback to students and they can go back and modify their original draft with their new understanding without having to create an entirely new map. One of the most common ways for students to practice and reflect on their learning is through online discussion boards. You can usually use the LMS that you're used to host a discussion board, but Blogger is another free option from Google for students to have online discussions. Using blog posts or discussion boards is a great way for students to share their thinking and synthesize their thoughts with their peers. When creating a discussion board, it's important to have a rubric available so that students know their expectations, both for their post and their response to their peers. Having these expectations can also challenge students to deepen their thinking and critically analyze their learning. In an online discussion, you can have students respond to a prompt, but you can also have them share products that they create for feedback. If you have a student create a concept map, they can share the link on a discussion board so their peers can ask them questions or give them feedback on ways they could improve. Students can then use this feedback to make changes and share their final product, along with a post about what changes they made and why. There are many possibilities of ways to use discussion boards, but they are all a great way to get students thinking and reflecting on their learning. Another strategy in promoting higher level thinking in student practice is by having students create original products that share their learning. We discussed these in the assessment section, but they can be used both as practice for students while giving the teacher information about their understanding. We mentioned earlier how students can create ebooks using Google Slides. They can also create a podcast to share stories. These are great ways for students to use new information to share their learning. In math, students can create how-to books to show how to solve real-world problems. In science, they can create a story about the topic they're learning, such as what the life of a droplet of water is like going through the water cycle. Social studies is all about storytelling, so students could write a biography about a historical figure, or they could write a story about what life was like if you're alive during a certain period of time. In language arts, students can write a fiction or a nonfiction story to practice writing. Ebooks and podcasts can also provide a fun way to practice or to prepare for writing essays. One final way for students to create a unique product is to have them make a YouTube video. One of my goals for this year is for my students to create a YouTube channel filled with how-to videos for each topic we learn. This way, students get practice with solving problems while they make the video, and there are many resources available from their peers to use to study. The topics that students can create videos for are endless. They can create stories to practice creating tone, using descriptive vocabulary or other literary elements. They can also create videos to share information about whatever topic they're learning. The great thing about YouTube is students can share their work with an authentic audience. This will help give meaning to their learning and motivate them to create a quality product. If students see people commenting on their video, imagine the satisfaction and pride they'll feel for having a real impact on someone's learning. That is an activity students will always remember. One vital part of the learning process, no matter what type of activity students complete, is that you're providing feedback to students and allowing them time to use that feedback to modify their work. This is where the true learning takes place. When students go back and make changes, their understanding of the material is growing and changing, and that is what we as educators strive for. So far, we know the first 4 parts to creating an online lesson: writing objectives, creating assessments, developing instructional materials, and providing students with practice and feedback. The last part of creating an effective online lesson is sharing expectations with students. It is vital that there is one place students know to go to for information about what activities they need to complete, due dates, and announcements for the week. There are many ways this can be accomplished, but I want to share the setup I used because many of my students commented it was helpful for them in being confident of knowing what was going on. Each week, I structured lessons in folders, and that housed all the links and assignments for the week. At the beginning of each folder, there was one page where I listed objectives, announced how to reach me, listed my office hours, and included the link to the Google Hangout. I also outlined all learning and practice activities that students were responsible for and included a short description for the purpose of each activity. There was also a compact checklist of due dates at the bottom. In addition to this page, I included a screencast that went through the same information, and I modeled any activities that I knew could be confusing to students. I made the page and the screencast mandatory for students to look at before they were able to access any of the activities. The goal is to make it impossible for students to not know what's going on in the class or the purpose behind their learning. Yes, some students will still have questions and some will be lost, but having this information in one place and in multiple formats will really increase students' confidence in learning because they understand the purpose for what they're doing and they know how to reach out for help. Creating this page may seem like a waste of time because the activities are posted for students to complete, but making everything explicit for them, especially younger students, can be the difference between a student complying and completing the work versus actively engaging in their learning. Thank you all so much for listening. I would love to hear some of your tricks and tips for creating an engaging online classroom. Feel free to follow this podcast, and you can join the To Teach with Tech community on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or YouTube at the number 2, Teach with Tech. I hope you join next week where we will dive into details on how to make an engaging video or screencast. If you have any specific questions you want addressed, or you want to share your experiences creating videos for students, please email me at toteachwithtech@gmail.com. The number 2, teachwithtech@gmail.com. Thanks, and we will chat soon.